In a quiet village, surrounded by endless fields and dusty paths, lived a young woman named Mira. She was known in her own family for her gentle nature, her patience, and her determination to help everyone she could. Mira had grown up learning the value of education and kindness, yet she had also been taught to respect traditions and the expectations of society. When she married into a wealthy family, she carried with her a mix of hope and nervous excitement. She dreamed of a life filled with love, peace, and small joys. Simple things like tending to the garden, cooking for her family, and maybe one day raising children. But the reality she stepped into was far different from the warm home she had imagined. Her husband, Rajan, was kind and soft-spoken, yet he often seemed torn between his love for her and the heavy influence of his family. The family she married into was respected in the village, not just for their wealth, but also for their strict adherence to old traditions. In their eyes, the world had a clear order, and everyone had a role to play. Mira's role, they believed, was simple yet cruelly restrictive. She must bring a son into the world. At first, the in-laws were polite, even welcoming. They smiled, offered her guidance, and appeared to care for her well-being. But beneath the surface, their expectations were rigid and unyielding. Every meal she cooked, every decision she made, was quietly judged. Was the food spicy enough? Was she respectful enough? Was she trying hard enough to conceive a son? Mira felt invisible under the weight of these questions, her accomplishments and kindness overlooked because she had not yet fulfilled the most important duty in their eyes. Months passed, and Mira tried to remain hopeful. She visited doctors, followed every suggestion, and did everything she could to honor her family. But each visit, each failed attempt, added to the pressure. The villagers, too, whispered behind her back. Children in the fields would ask her why she didn't have a baby, and women in the market would shake their heads as they passed by. Even though no one said it openly, the message was clear. She had failed in the most basic role a woman could play in that community. Inside the walls of her husband's home, the tension grew silently but unmistakably. Her mother-in-law, once seemingly kind, began giving her cold glances that could cut deeper than words. She would make passing remarks during meals, comments about her worth, and sometimes she would compare Mira to other women in the village who had sons. Her father-in-law, proud and commanding, joined in on rare occasions, reminding Mira that family honor rested on her ability to bear a male child. Each word felt like a weight pressing her down, making her smaller, more invisible, and more frightened. Rajan noticed her struggle, but even he felt trapped. His love for Mira was genuine, yet he had grown up in the same rigid household. The constant pressure from his family often left him unable to speak in her defense. Sometimes, late at night, he would hold her hand and whisper apologies she didn't need to hear, promising that he wished things were different. Mira, trying to stay strong, would nod and smile through tears she refused to shed in front of anyone else. She knew showing weakness might make her situation worse. Despite the fear, Mira tried to find small moments of happiness. She took walks by the river, where the water sparkled under the sun and the wind carried the scent of flowers and soil. She found comfort in talking to her childhood friend, who reminded her of her worth and strength. She found joy in caring for the small animals around the house, feeding the chickens and helping the cows, feeling that at least she could nurture life in some form. But even these small joys were fragile, always shadowed by the looming expectations that seemed to grow heavier each day. The villagers' gossip, once a background hum, began to rise like a storm. Some women would avoid her entirely, while others would pass judgment in whispers, making her feel as if every step she took was watched, measured, and found lacking. She often sat alone at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to find answers she could not. Why was her life measured by a single expectation? Why was her worth tied to something beyond her control? These thoughts weighed heavily, yet she knew she could not let them see her despair. Strength had to be shown, even when her heart was breaking. The tension in the household reached a point where even ordinary days became exercises in survival. Each conversation, each glance, each unspoken expectation became a test of her patience and courage. She had to smile when insulted subtly. She had to bow her head when judged unfairly, and she had to endure the constant pressure to prove herself. Mira often asked herself whether love and kindness could survive in such a world, whether a person could retain their spirit when surrounded by so much coldness and judgment. Yet, through it all, Mira's heart never hardened. She continued to treat others with respect, to help when she could, and to hold on to the hope that life might change. She found courage in small victories, a kind word from her husband, a smile from a sympathetic neighbor, a moment of peace in her garden. She learned to protect her spirit quietly, to resist letting despair claim her entirely, even when the shadows of expectation loomed large. In the evenings, when the household quieted, Mira would sometimes speak to herself in the mirror, reminding herself of who she was. Not a failure, not a victim, but a young woman of courage, capable of surviving even the harshest storms. These private affirmations were her lifeline, the only way to keep her spirit alive amid the relentless pressure. She refused to let the world define her entirely, clinging to the small but essential truth that she still had a choice in how she responded to life's cruelty. Through the first months and years of her married life, Mira became a symbol, though silently, of endurance and quiet strength. Though the expectations of her in-laws weighed like chains, and though gossip and judgment followed her like shadows, she remained committed to living with dignity. Her story, at this stage, is one of struggle, resilience, and courage in the face of overwhelming pressure. It sets the stage for the trials to come, but also for the hope that even in darkness, light can appear when least expected. By the end of this chapter of her life, the village knew her not as a woman who had failed, but as one who carried the weight of impossible expectations with grace. People may not have recognized it at first, but those who paid attention could see that Mira possessed a quiet power, a resilience born from the relentless hardships she faced every day. And though she did not know it yet, her life was about to take a dramatic turn. One that would test her courage further and introduce a force of protection and hope that she could never have imagined. The days in Mira's household grew heavier, each one blending into the next, under the weight of silent judgment and growing tension. What had started as cold looks and subtle comments now escalated into open hostility. Her in-laws, frustrated by the absence of a son, began to blame her for what they saw as a failure, ignoring the natural limits and uncertainties of life. They spoke of her in whispers at first, then in louder voices, expressing disappointment at every opportunity. Mira tried to remain calm, keeping her thoughts and fears to herself. But the atmosphere in the house had become unbearable. Mira's mornings, once filled with the hope of small joys, now began with anxiety. She would wake before anyone else, careful to move quietly through the hallways, fearing even an accidental noise might trigger her mother-in-law's anger. Meals were tense affairs. Every gesture she made, pouring tea, arranging dishes, or serving food, was observed critically. "Why is the milk not warm enough?" Or, "Did you really have to cook this today?" were no longer casual remarks. Each comment was loaded with expectation, a reminder that she had not yet fulfilled the most important duty in the family's eyes. Her husband, Rajan, watched helplessly. He loved Mira deeply, but he had been raised to respect his parents' authority above all else. He would sit silently at the dining table, eating in awkward discomfort, wishing he could speak up, but unable to break the hold his family had over the household. At night, he would come to Mira's room, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her. "They don't understand, Mira," he would whisper. "They don't see the truth. You are more than what they say." But his reassurances, though sincere, could not erase the fear and humiliation she felt daily. The villagers' gossip began to spread faster, fueled by the sight of a young woman under pressure. Mothers in the market would shake their heads as she walked by, their eyes filled with unspoken judgment. Some women would avoid her entirely, fearful that being seen with Mira would invite the same scorn. Even children, innocent as they were, would ask pointed questions, unaware of the pain their curiosity caused. Every encounter reminded Mira of the invisible cage she was living in, a cage built not of walls, but of expectations, opinions, and fear. One afternoon, The tension reached a breaking point. Mira had been quietly preparing the household for a small celebration, her husband's birthday. She decorated the room with simple flowers she had picked from the garden and carefully arranged the food on the table. For a moment, she allowed herself a small smile, thinking that perhaps this day could be different. But as her in-laws entered, their eyes immediately fell on her. Not with appreciation, but with disapproval. "Why are the decorations so simple?" her mother-in-law asked sharply. "A son would have ensured a grand celebration." The words struck Mira like a physical blow. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to continue setting the table, forcing a smile she did not feel. Her father-in-law nodded in agreement, his face stern and cold. Even Rajan looked away, trapped between his love for Mira and the oppressive presence of his family. Days like these were not rare. They had become a pattern, a cycle of fear and tension that seemed unending. Mira often retreated to her small garden, the one place where she could breathe freely, where the sun on her face and the wind in her hair reminded her that there was still life beyond the walls of judgment. She would tend to the flowers, water the plants, and talk to the small birds that visited her garden, finding comfort in the simplicity and innocence of nature. Yet even in this small refuge, the weight of expectation followed her. She could hear the whispers of the villagers in her mind, see the disapproving glances, and feel the cold eyes of her in-laws as if they were there with her, even when they were not. As months passed, the pressure intensified. Her in-laws began to impose stricter rules. Mira was expected to wake before dawn, complete all household chores perfectly, and attend to the family's every need without complaint. Any perceived mistake became a reason for criticism, sometimes harsh, sometimes silent but equally painful. Her spirit, which had once been full of hope and courage, now carried the weight of constant fear. She became careful with every word she spoke, every step she took, fearing that any misstep could provoke anger or disappointment. One evening, the tension reached a terrifying peak. The family had gathered for a small ceremony, an event meant to honor ancestors and bring blessings to the household. Mira prepared carefully, wearing her best attire, hoping that this day might bring some approval or acknowledgement. But as the ceremony began, her in-laws' eyes were sharp with scrutiny. They whispered to each other, judging every gesture, every movement. Mira tried to remain calm, her hands steady, her heart pounding. She offered prayers silently, hoping that some divine intervention might bring peace, if not to her family, then at least to her own troubled mind. Then, the impossible happened. In a cruel twist of anger and superstition, her in-laws accused her of bringing bad luck to the family because she had not given them a son. Their voices rose, filled with frustration and blame. Mira froze, her heart hammering, unable to understand how the people she had tried to respect and care for could turn against her so completely. She tried to explain, to reason, to plead. But the words seemed to vanish in the tense, angry air. The family's accusations grew louder, more aggressive, and more frightening. The room, which should have been a place of celebration, now felt like a trap, a cage where she could not escape the cruelty that had built around her over the years. Fear took hold of her. She could feel the walls closing in, her body trembling as panic surged through her. Her in-laws, in a moment of extreme superstition and rage, did something that no one could have imagined. They tried to punish her in a way meant to instill fear and force submission. Mira's world spun, her heart raced, and her thoughts became a whirlwind of confusion and terror. She did not understand why the people she had cared for and obeyed could commit such an act. She felt alone, vulnerable, and powerless. But even in that moment of terror, Mira's mind was sharp. She remembered the lessons her parents had taught her. To stay calm, to find strength even in darkness, and to never give up hope. She fought against the panic that threatened to consume her, struggling to breathe, to think, and to survive. Every fiber of her being told her to resist, to hold on, and to believe that help might come, even when it seemed impossible. It was during this moment of ultimate fear that her life took an unexpected turn. A voice broke through the chaos, a strong, determined voice, unlike anything Mira had heard in the house before. Someone had arrived. Someone who refused to allow fear and cruelty to dominate the situation. The sudden presence of an outsider, brave and unwavering, brought a flicker of hope. Mira clung to that hope like a lifeline, her heart beating not just with fear, but now with the possibility of rescue. The story at this point is no longer just about Mira's suffering. It is about the fragile, powerful intersection of fear and courage. It is about the moment when life hangs in balance, when one person's determination can become the difference between despair and survival. Mira, trembling yet resolute, felt the presence of this new force as a promise, an unexpected chance to escape the cruelty that had dominated her life. This part of Mira's story emphasizes the depth of oppression she faced, the cruelty born of superstition and rigid expectations, and the human spirit's instinct to survive even in the most frightening circumstances. It sets the stage for a turning point, where hope enters a world previously defined by fear and judgment. The tension is unbearable, yet it is within this darkness that the seeds of courage, rescue, and unexpected salvation begin to grow. As the evening shadows lengthened, Mira waited, trembling but not broken. She understood that her life could change in an instant. The danger was real, the fear palpable, but so was the glimmer of hope. In that moment, she was a woman caught between two worlds, one of oppression and despair, and one where courage, compassion, and intervention might finally offer her a chance at freedom and dignity. Just as the night seemed darkest and Mira felt her strength slipping, a new presence arrived, one that changed everything. His name was Arjun, a rancher from a nearby village, known for his courage, honesty, and unwavering sense of justice. He had heard whispers of Mira's struggles from the villagers, small hints that something terrible was happening in her household. Unlike most who avoided trouble or whispered in fear, Arjun could not stand injustice. He had a strong sense of right and wrong, and the thought of someone being harmed or oppressed in silence weighed heavily on him. That evening, as Mira faced the cruel accusations and dangerous actions of her in-laws, Arjun arrived. The moment he stepped into the household, he sensed the tension, the fear that clung to the air like a thick fog. His eyes quickly found Mira, and in that instant, he knew she was in danger. Without hesitation, he approached, moving with calm determination, though his presence alone carried a forceful authority. It was as if his arrival had drawn a line between fear and hope, despair and courage. Arjun's voice rang out, firm and unwavering. "Stop this at once. She belongs to no one but herself, and she will not be harmed." His words startled the family. The sudden intrusion of someone so confident and assertive shook the foundation of the household. Mira's in-laws, who had grown used to controlling everyone around them, suddenly realized that someone else had arrived to challenge them, a person who would not be intimidated by their wealth, status, or traditions. Mira, trembling with relief and disbelief, watched as Arjun stood before the angry family. His presence was protective, his eyes fierce, and yet calm. He did not raise his hand in anger. He did not shout without reason. Instead, he made it clear through every gesture and word that he would not allow harm to come to her. For the first time in years, Mira felt a spark of safety, a glimmer of hope that perhaps she could survive this night without losing everything. Rajan, her husband, stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Arjun's arrival gave him courage. He finally realized that Mira was not alone, that someone outside the household understood the injustice and would act. Rajan's fear of his parents clashed with his love for Mira, and in that moment, he took a small but important step. He whispered quietly to her, "I'm here now. We will face this together." Though small, these words strengthened her resolve. Arjun did not wait for further confrontation. He stepped forward and faced the in-laws, his voice calm but commanding. "You will not harm her. She is not responsible for fulfilling your outdated expectations. Your anger and cruelty have no place here." His words carried weight because they were grounded in truth, fairness, and an unshakable moral strength. The family was taken aback. They were not accustomed to someone challenging their authority, especially with such certainty and bravery. For a few tense moments, silence filled the room. Mira could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her chest. But it was no longer entirely from fear. It was also the rhythm of hope, courage, and the possibility of rescue. Arjun's presence created a space where fear could not dominate. Even the villagers, who had gathered outside after hearing commotion, felt the change in the air. Whispers of support began to grow, reinforcing the idea that Mira was not alone and that the injustice she faced could be challenged. Arjun's next words were simple, yet filled with power. "She is mine." At first, some misinterpreted his meaning, thinking he was claiming ownership, but Arjun's declaration was not about possession, it was about protection. By saying mine, he meant that he would safeguard her, stand by her, and ensure that no harm would come to her. It was a promise, a public and undeniable commitment to her safety and dignity. The in-laws could not ignore it, for his courage and authority left no room for argument or denial. Seeing Arjun stand so firmly, Rajan finally found his own courage. He joined Arjun, speaking for the first time in defense of his wife. "You are wrong. Mira has done nothing but love and care for this family. She does not deserve this treatment. I will not allow it." His words, though nervous at first, gained strength as he spoke, fueled by the presence and support of Arjun. Together, they became a force too strong for fear, cruelty, and outdated traditions to withstand. Mira's heart filled with gratitude, but also with awe. In the midst of terror and despair, two people, one who loved her and one who had chosen to stand for justice, had stepped forward to change her life. The moment became a turning point, showing her that courage was not just about resisting fear alone but also about standing with those who fight for what is right. It was a lesson she would carry with her forever. The in-laws, confronted by this unexpected force, could do nothing but retreat. Their anger had no power against such steadfast bravery. They argued and protested, but it was empty noise. Villagers watching from outside began to murmur, their voices growing in support of Mira. Arjun and Rajan remained firm, refusing to allow intimidation to succeed. It was a quiet battle, a clash of courage against cruelty. And courage won that night. Once the immediate danger had passed, Arjun made sure Mira was safe and calm. He guided her to a quiet room, offering water and comfort, speaking gently to ease the trauma she had endured. He listened to her recount the fear, the whispers, and the cruelty she had faced for years. Mira, still trembling, felt a sense of relief she had never known. For the first time, she could speak freely about her pain without judgment or fear. Rajan, too, realized the importance of support and action. He promised to stand by Mira, to protect her, and to challenge his family's unreasonable expectations. The trio became a quiet but powerful alliance, demonstrating that change begins when courage confronts fear and injustice. This night marked not just a rescue but a shift in power and perspective, a moment when what was hidden in shadows finally stepped into the light. After the confrontation, Arjun remained a protective presence, ensuring that authorities and villagers were informed if necessary. He helped Mira understand that she had the right to live without fear, to be respected, and to be treated as a human being with dignity. The lesson was clear. Even in a world where cruelty and superstition dominate, one person's bravery could challenge the status quo and bring hope. Mira's recovery was not immediate, of course. The emotional scars left by years of fear and oppression ran deep. But Arjun's intervention gave her the space to begin healing. She started to see that her life did not have to be defined by the cruel expectations of others. Slowly, she began to reclaim her sense of self, realizing that courage was not only about facing danger but also about finding strength within oneself to embrace life again. In the days that followed, the villagers spoke of the night as a turning point. The story of Mira's rescue spread, not as gossip, but as an example of bravery, justice, and hope. It inspired others who had suffered in silence to believe that they, too, could find help and stand against cruelty. Mira, though still recovering, became a symbol of resilience, demonstrating that even in the harshest circumstances, courage, and compassion could prevail. The bond between Mira and Arjun grew, built not just on gratitude, but on mutual respect, trust, and a shared understanding of right and wrong. He did not see her as weak or dependent. He saw her strength, her resilience, and her capacity to endure. Together, they began to envision a future where fear no longer dictated the terms of life, where respect and dignity were valued above outdated traditions and expectations. Through this experience, Mira learned an important truth. Life could be cruel, but courage, love, and justice could transform it. She understood that help could come from unexpected places, and that standing together with those who fight for what is right could change even the most hopeless situations. The darkness she had lived under for so long began to lift, replaced by the warmth of safety, support, and renewed hope. The night of her rescue was a turning point not only in Mira's life but also in the lives of those around her. It demonstrated the power of bravery, the importance of intervention, and the impact of standing up for what is right. For Mira, it marked the end of years of silent suffering and the beginning of a journey toward healing, self-discovery, and a life lived on her own terms. After the terrifying night had passed, Mira slowly began to understand that her life was no longer entirely controlled by fear. The immediate danger had ended, but the journey toward freedom, justice, and peace had only just begun. Arjun remained a steady presence, offering guidance, protection, and above all, reassurance that she would no longer face harm alone. With his support, Mira began to see that the life she had endured for years, the isolation, the judgment, and the constant pressure could change. She could step into a future defined not by the cruel expectations of others, but by her own choices and strength. The days following her rescue were filled with a careful balance of healing and action. Mira received medical attention, not just for the minor physical injuries she had suffered, but also for the emotional trauma she had endured over the years. A compassionate doctor listened patiently as she spoke, validating her feelings and helping her understand that the blame and cruelty she had faced were never hers to carry. Each appointment, each conversation, reinforced the idea that she had value beyond anyone's expectations, and that her life was precious. Meanwhile, Arjun helped her navigate the complicated process of seeking justice. Together with Rajan, they involved the local authorities to ensure that Mira's in-laws could no longer threaten her or anyone else. The investigation was careful and thorough, aimed at protecting her and setting a precedent that abuse and cruelty could not be tolerated. The in-laws, once so domineering and feared, now faced the consequences of their actions. For the first time, Mira saw that societal norms, while deeply ingrained, could be challenged, and that justice could be achieved even against long-standing traditions. In the midst of legal proceedings, Mira began to rebuild her life in small, meaningful ways. She returned to the garden that had been her refuge during years of fear, tending to the flowers with renewed purpose. Each plant she nurtured became a symbol of growth, hope, and the life she was now reclaiming. She spent time reading, writing, and reconnecting with her own passions, things she had set aside in the effort to survive within the oppressive walls of her household. The simple acts of daily life became powerful reminders of her strength and resilience. Rajan, too, experienced a transformation. Witnessing the courage and support of Arjun and seeing Mira reclaim her life, he realized the importance of standing up for what is right, even against family pressure. His love for Mira deepened, not only because of the trials they had faced but also because of the strength she displayed throughout. Together, they began to envision a life built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared responsibility, where no one's worth was determined by outdated expectations or superstition. The villagers, once quick to whisper judgment, began to change their perception as well. Word of Mira's ordeal and her courageous recovery spread, and with it came admiration. People began to recognize her not as someone who had failed to meet impossible expectations, but as a woman of incredible strength and resilience. Mothers who had previously criticized her now approached with respect, offering support and even seeking her advice on matters of family and courage. Slowly, the village itself began to shift, inspired by her story to reconsider the rigid norms that had caused so much suffering. Mira also realized the power of her voice. With the support of Arjun and Rajan, she began to speak gently but firmly about the importance of valuing women for who they are, not just for their ability to fulfill traditional roles. She shared her story with other women who had endured similar pressures, helping them understand that they were not alone and that it was possible to seek help, protection, and justice. Her experiences, though painful, became a source of inspiration for many, proving that even in the darkest circumstances, courage and support could lead to change. As Mira healed emotionally and mentally, she began to see a future filled with possibilities. She explored opportunities to contribute to her community in positive ways, supporting education for girls, advising women on their rights, and advocating for fairness and compassion in family dynamics. Her life became a testament to resilience, showing that while suffering can shape a person, it does not have to define them. Instead, it can provide the strength and insight to make a meaningful difference in the lives of others. Her relationship with Arjun also grew in trust and respect. While their connection had begun with his protective intervention, it evolved into a partnership based on mutual understanding, care, and admiration. He never treated her as weak. Instead, he encouraged her independence and celebrated her courage. Together, they envisioned a life where safety, dignity, and love could coexist, free from the shadows of fear that had once dominated her existence. This bond, built on respect and protection, gave Mira the confidence to dream and plan for a future she had never dared to imagine before. Rajan's transformation was equally profound. He became an advocate within his own family, gently challenging outdated traditions and emphasizing respect for women. Over time, he worked to rebuild trust within the community, showing that it was possible to honor culture and tradition while rejecting cruelty and injustice. His growth reflected the powerful ripple effect that courage and moral action can have, demonstrating that even those raised in oppressive environments can change when confronted with fairness, love, and guidance. The in-laws, facing legal consequences and societal disapproval, were forced to confront their actions. Though the process was difficult and uncomfortable for them, it sent a clear message to the community. Abuse, cruelty, and rigid, harmful expectations would no longer go unchallenged. The villagers witnessed that justice, when pursued thoughtfully and courageously, could protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. This shift in the community created a safer environment for women and children, setting a precedent for fairness and compassion over fear and tradition. Through all of this, Mira learned the most important lessons of her life. She realized that fear could be overcome with courage, that justice could prevail even in the face of long-standing oppression, and that one person's actions, like Arjun's intervention, could change the course of another person's life. She discovered the power of resilience, the importance of support, and the value of speaking up for oneself and others. Her experiences, though harrowing, became the foundation for a life built on strength, dignity, and hope. As months turned into years, Mira began to fully reclaim her life. She pursued personal growth, nurtured relationships built on respect and love, and continued to advocate for the rights and dignity of women. Her story became known not for the tragedy she endured, but for the courage she displayed and the positive changes she inspired in her community. Children grew up hearing her story, learning that strength, bravery, and compassion could overcome fear and injustice. Women found hope in her experiences, understanding that even in oppressive circumstances, support, courage, and determination could lead to freedom and respect. The village itself slowly transformed. Families began to question outdated customs and rigid expectations, recognizing that true honor comes from kindness, fairness, and respect for all members of the community. Women found greater freedom to pursue education, careers, and personal growth. The environment, once defined by fear and judgment, became one where compassion and justice could thrive. Mira's journey had sparked a quiet revolution, a shift in values that would benefit generations to come. In her personal life, Mira found joy in simple yet profound ways. She cherished moments with Arjun and Rajan, enjoyed her garden and community work, and embraced the freedom to make choices for herself. Her resilience and courage became a source of inspiration not just for others, but for herself. She no longer measured her worth by the approval of those who had tried to control her. Instead, she measured it by the lives she touched, the courage she displayed, and the freedom she had claimed for herself. Looking back, Mira understood that the darkest moments of her life had revealed her deepest strength. The cruelty and fear she endured had been overcome by courage, compassion, and support from those who valued justice over tradition. Her story was no longer one of suffering, but one of empowerment, hope, and the triumph of the human spirit. She had faced the impossible, survived, and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to live life on her own terms. Ultimately, Mira's journey became a beacon of hope. A reminder that even in the face of cruelty, injustice, and fear, courage, love, and perseverance can prevail. Her life, once defined by oppression, was now marked by freedom, respect, and meaningful purpose. She had transformed her suffering into strength, her fear into resilience, and her story into an inspiration for countless others.